Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are slipping into a world where Rome never split. Not into East and West, not into Latin and Greek, not into fading memory and surviving shadow. Nope. In this quiet universe, the eternal city just kept going. One emperor, one throne, one very long to-do list. You're standing now at the edge of the forum, barefoot on warm marble, pigeons overhead, incense trailing through the basilicas. Everything smells like oil and stone dust. It's quiet, but alive. You feel it in the columns that never crumbled, in the aqueducts still flowing, in the bureaucrats still arguing over road repairs. And if you listen closely, you can hear a scribe muttering, "Why does the census always fall during wine season?" You probably won't survive in this Rome. Not because of lions or plagues, but because being a citizen here requires real commitment. You'll need to memorize your praetors, know your baths by name, and send your taxes on time in triplicate. This is an empire of paperwork and pillars, not chaos and collapse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle past a row of laurel trees toward the Palatine Hill. The year is 285 CE. In our world, Emperor Diocletian has just decided that Rome's too big to rule alone. He appoints a co-emperor. He divides the empire into East and West. He does what all tired leaders eventually do. He delegates. But in this world, he doesn't. Here, Diocletian does something weird. He decides, nope, I've got this. Maybe he drinks stronger wine. Maybe he hires more scribes. Maybe he just really likes Rome being Rome. But instead of splitting the empire, he knits it tighter. He strengthens the borders, builds up the army, adds even more provinces to better manage the mess. He starts giving governors less power and more oversight. He centralizes, standardizes, micromanages like his life depends on it. And somehow, it works. Authoritative fact: Diocletian's real-world division of the Roman Empire was known as the Tetrarchy. 4 emperors ruling together, 2 senior and 2 junior. It was a short-term fix for an overstretched empire, and it dissolved into civil wars within a generation. Odd fact: Diocletian was the only Roman emperor to voluntarily retire. He stepped down and went home to grow cabbages in what is now Croatia. The man built an empire and his own seaside retirement villa. Talk about a life balance pivot. The historians in this alternate world still debate whether Diocletian was a genius or just very, very tired. The Senate grumbled, of course. The military shrugged. The provinces sighed. But under this alternate single-ruler model, the empire stays whole. No Constantinople, no Eastern court speaking Greek, no slow decline of the West while the East grows rich. Just Rome. Still massive, still Latin, still yelling at people in sandals. Light joke number 1. You imagine Diocletian slamming open the imperial map and shouting, "You get a census! You get a census! Everyone gets taxed!" Light joke number 2. You picture a governor in distant Britannia sending a scroll that says, "Still raining, please send sun." Light joke number 3. You suspect the imperial scribes invented long-winded Latin just to sound more important at staff meetings. And so the empire holds. Barely, but it holds. You walk the walls of a unified Rome, its legions stretched from the Caledonian highlands to the Red Sea. You see lighthouses blinking along every coast, trade flowing through harbors still paved in stone. Senators grip scrolls tighter than swords. They still think they're in charge. There are no competing capitals, no cultural splits, no Eastern Orthodoxy, no Byzantium waiting in the wings. There's only one center, and it's still called Roma. And as the sun sets over the Tiber, you realize you're living in a world that never learned how to break, just how to stretch.
You're standing behind the throne now, watching a single emperor attempt the impossible. Rule from the Irish Sea to the Syrian desert without cloning himself. And no, there's no AI to help him. Just endless scrolls, half-asleep messengers, and governors who swear they sent that report 3 weeks ago. Welcome to Centralized Chaos, Roman Edition. This emperor, let's call him Maximus Secundus, because why not, is Diocletian's successor in this alternate Rome that never split. And you know what? He's trying. Really. He wakes up at sunrise, says a prayer to Jupiter just to hedge his bets, and begins reading complaints from provinces he's never even visited. Authoritative fact. The real Roman Empire's greatest weakness was administrative overload. With territories across 3 continents, communication delays and regional rebellions made it nearly impossible to govern efficiently. This was one of the reasons for its historic East-West division. Odd fact, the Roman postal system, called cursus publicus, could move official messages surprisingly fast, around 50 miles a day. That's impressive for the ancient world. Not so impressive when you need to know how angry the Goths are before they're knocking on your city gates. In this unified empire, Maximus Secundus doesn't delegate rule to a co-emperor. Instead, he builds a network of shadow advisors, sort of like imperial interns with terrifying power. They rotate every year to prevent corruption, though that just means each one rushes to skim gold while they can. Light joke number 1. You imagine the emperor staring at a map and muttering, "Wait, when did we get Armenia?" Light joke number 2. You picture an exhausted aide suggesting, "What if we just ruled Italy and called it a day?" Light joke number 3. You suspect most Senate meetings begin with, "We have 847 new tax complaints, and also Syria's on fire again." Still, the empire survives. The imperial court moves seasonally, not to split the empire, but to keep the emperor alive. 1 month he's in Ravenna, the next he's sailing to Carthage, scribes chasing him with inkwells and dusty scrolls. And here's the kicker. People actually start to believe that the one empire model is working. Rome expands its use of regional councils. Governors are granted special access to Imperial Sync, a monthly messenger dispatch system that attempts to coordinate grain flows, border patrols, and temple maintenance. In one scroll. Spoiler, it's a mess. But the legions are still loyal. Why? because they're paid just enough, and fed just barely, and praised loudly and often at the amphitheaters. You walk beside a centurion in Germania who hasn't seen Rome in 10 years but still calls it the heart. You chat with a merchant from Gaul who's learned to curse in Latin and Greek and sells amphoras with Caesar memes etched in them. Vini, vidi, vino, etched on every other jug. The empire is stretched, yes, but not yet cracking. And you notice something strange. Without the East-West split, there's no Constantinople rising as a cultural counterweight. The East speaks more Latin than Greek. Temples aren't converted, they're repurposed. The great philosophical schools of Athens still get funding, though now with quarterly audits. You peek at one of those scrolls. It reads, Item 32. Please stop referring to every public fountain as sacred, especially the one near the forum latrines. Maximus Secundus makes it 10 years, then 20. He dies of natural causes, a historical miracle, and leaves behind an empire that still believes it's a single body. It's not efficient, it's not always fair, but it's Roman. And in this alternate history, that's enough.
You're drifting toward the Aegean Sea now. Salt in the air, sandals slipping on polished white marble. The city before you is not Constantinople. It doesn't exist here. No shining capital named for a Christian emperor. No Hagia Sophia. Just Byzantium, a sleepy port town, unremarkable, uninspired, still a bit salty from being overlooked. Because in this world, Rome never split, and Constantinople never rose. Authoritative fact. In our timeline, Emperor Constantine the Great founded Constantinople in 330 CE as the new capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was strategically located and became the heart of the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. Odd fact, the name Byzantium wasn't even widely used by its own citizens. They called themselves Romans, Romeoi, long after the Western Empire fell. Historians added the Byzantine label much later to keep their lecture slides clean. But in this version of history, Constantine never needs to relocate. Why would he? Rome's not faltering. The empire's still one slightly dysfunctional family, so no glittering twin capital, no massive transfer of art, treasure, or political weight eastward. Instead, Rome doubles down. The imperial administration pours resources back into the Italian peninsula. Roads are reinforced, ports in Neapolis and Ostia expand, and eastern cities like Antioch and Alexandria remain important, just not independent. And here's the weird part. It kind of works. Without a separate eastern capital, Rome becomes a true central node again, but also the East is annoyed. Governors in Asia Minor mutter, "We used to be the intellectual center, now we're just another province." Alexandria files about a dozen strongly worded scrolls per year. Light joke number 1. You imagine a Greek scholar huffing, "Rome thinks it invented civilization, we invented wine and complaining." Light joke number 2. You picture a provincial mayor in Syria asking, "Do we have to speak Latin at staff meetings?" Light joke number 3. You suspect the town of Byzantium throws an annual Not Constantinople festival featuring mediocre seafood and passive-aggressive poetry. But there's no denying the impact. No Eastern Roman Empire means no Orthodox Church forming separately, no centuries-long rivalry with Latin Catholicism, no complex Greek legal traditions evolving in isolation. Instead, the Church stays centralized. The emperor remains deeply entangled with theology, sometimes terrifyingly so.
Debates over Christ's divinity still happen, but now with Roman bureaucracy involved, which somehow makes it worse. And over in the Holy Land, the tension builds. With a Latin-heavy empire and no eastern half to shield its cultural neighbors, Judea and nearby regions get pulled deeper into the Roman religious machine. The balance of East and West no longer exists. It's all Rome. One emperor, one pope, one long hallway of political migraines. But culture blooms oddly. You visit Athens, where philosophers still gather under colonnades, now joined by mathematicians from Carthage and engineers from Hispaniola. They argue about theology, aqueduct pressure, and how many laurels a senator should be allowed to wear in public. In Alexandria, scrolls are still copied, but now they're taxed. Rome charges for preservation, calling it a knowledge maintenance fee. And in forgotten Byzantium, someone finally opens a bakery. That's about it. You look out across the sea and realize what's missing. No golden dome reflecting the ambition of an empire trying to save itself. No imperial shift that changed history. In this world, there's no second capital, just Rome, stubborn and slightly sweaty, trying to be everywhere at once. It hasn't failed. Not yet. But it hasn't grown new roots either.
You're on the northern frontier now, boots crunching frost-covered grass as you follow a Roman scout through the dense forests of Germania. The trees here don't care about Latin, and neither do the people sharpening axes just beyond them. The barbarians are watching, and they're confused. Because in this version of history, Rome hasn't fallen apart, it hasn't split, it hasn't retreated, and it sure hasn't let Gaul turn into whatever Gaul usually turns into. The Roman Empire is still one massive, unified beast, and the tribes at its borders are starting to ask uncomfortable questions, like, why haven't they collapsed yet? Authoritative fact: in real history, Rome's division into East and West made it easier for various Germanic groups, Goths, Vandals, Huns, and others, to attack and carve out territories from the Western Empire, especially after the capital weakened in the 5th century. Odd fact: the word barbarian comes from the Greek barbaros, mocking the sound of foreign languages, bar. So yes, Rome was basically calling everyone else blah-blahbians. In this world, though, the Roman Empire is still fully manning its frontiers, and it's getting creative. Forts in Gaul are now supply hubs connected by upgraded roads. Dacia's still Roman, barely. Britannia has better walls, fewer uprisings, and slightly improved weather reports. Today, 70% chance of rain, 100% chance of druids. You ride alongside a Roman envoy who's learned to bribe entire Gothic villages with cheese, iron tools, and flattering inscriptions carved into shields. You stop in a border town where everyone speaks a weird mix of Latin and something that sounds like Norse, and the local governor is named Lucius Ragnarsson. Light joke number 1. You imagine a Gothic warrior pointing at a Roman aqueduct and going, honestly, I kind of respect it. Light joke number 2. You picture a Roman commander yelling, they're attacking the bridge again because they want to pay taxes now? Light joke number 3. You suspect half the conflicts at the border are just misunderstandings over whether it's barbarium or barbaricum. And here's the thing. With no weakened Western half to pick apart, the barbarians start adapting faster. Instead of raiding, some begin negotiating. Trade deals emerge. Foederati agreements are signed. Tribes allowed to live inside the empire in exchange for military service. But the empire is still nervous. Old Rome remembers the sack of the city in 390 BCE like it happened yesterday, and they're not about to let history rhyme again. So they do what Rome always does when anxious: overreact. More legions, more forts, more surveillance. You walk past entire villages relocated for strategic purposes. You hear whispers of spies planted among the tribes. You see temples to Mars with slightly passive-aggressive altars. Still, the borders hold. And as a result, you witness something unexpected. The empire and its neighbors don't collapse into violence, they blur. Germanic chieftains start wearing Roman armor. Their sons get sent to Roman schools. One particularly ambitious warlord commissions a statue of himself in a toga riding a bear. The Senate is scandalized. The people are impressed. You camp under the stars beside a group of young Roman Gothic recruits arguing over who makes better wine, Latins or Lombards. One of them's writing a play in Latin about forest spirits. Another dreams of becoming a Roman senator. He's 6'5" and barely speaks Latin, but hey, dream big. This is a borderland without a fracture, a buffer zone where assimilation replaces invasion. Not because Rome is stronger, but because it's unified and has time to get creative. You wonder, is this still an empire? Or something stranger? Something newer? But for now, the watchtower lights flicker on. The scouts check the tree line. And the empire exhales. Still whole, still breathing.
You're walking through candlelit corridors now, beneath arched ceilings echoing with Latin hymns. The incense is thick, the robes are silk, and the debate is eternal. Because in this Rome that never split, there's only one church, one pope, one doctrine, and everyone's annoyed. Authoritative fact. In real history, the split between the Western, Roman Catholic, and Eastern, Orthodox churches was formalized in 1054 CE in what's called the Great Schism. Language barriers, theological disputes, and political tension between Rome and Constantinople played a major role. Odd fact, one of the smaller but somehow spicy disagreements was over whether communion bread should be leavened or unleavened. Yes, thousands of years of tension boiled over a literal loaf. But here in unified Rome, there's no Eastern Church breaking off, no Patriarch of Constantinople claiming equal authority, and no Hagia Sophia rising in defiance. The Church, like the Empire, remains centralized and deeply Roman. That means the Pope doesn't just pray. He negotiates, he audits, he files budget reports. And sometimes, he leads troops. You stroll past a chapel-turned-council room where bishops argue about how many angels fit on a balance sheet. Light joke number 1. You imagine the Pope muttering, "Lead us not into schism, but deliver us from theological footnotes." Light joke number 2. You picture a monk submitting a 40-page scroll on why Jesus would have definitely paid taxes on time. Light joke number 3. You suspect the church has a secret committee just to veto ridiculous saint names. Like Saint Dave the Dubious didn't make the cut. Without the East-West split, Christianity grows under one umbrella, but it's a leaky one. You witness epic council meetings where theology is tangled in politics. They argue about the nature of Christ while negotiating grain shipments from Egypt. A bishop from Gaul proposes 3 new feast days. A North African delegate suggests fewer. Everyone wants incense. No one wants to pay for it. But the faith grows. From Londinium to Petra, churches dot the landscape. The basilica remains the standard blueprint with added Roman flair. Aqueducts for baptisms, mosaic floors with tax-deductible miracles, and choirs that double as census takers. The lack of division creates unexpected harmony and confusion. There's no Orthodox iconoclasm, no Protestant precursors yet, but plenty of local saints with suspiciously regional miracles. In Hispania, a man is declared holy for taming a bear with grace. In Syria, a desert monk claims to have heard God tell a joke. The punchline is lost in translation. You watch as Latin remains the language of scripture and debate, forcing reluctant theologians from the East to memorize declensions just to argue properly. A young monk named Andreas complains, "I came to discuss grace, not conjugate verbs." Still, the Roman Church remains intact, giant, bureaucratic, slightly sweaty. But more than anything, it's influential. No schism means no rival power center. No Eastern Church means fewer doctrinal escapes. Heresies are processed through proper channels. Form 88B, petition to consider heretical ideas, and often end in quiet exile or vigorous footnotes. But there's something eerie here too. Without a rival, the Church gets comfortable. It leans heavily on state funding. Tithes turn into taxes, the Pope becomes both shepherd and landlord. You overhear a priest muttering, "We were promised martyrdom, not land disputes." You walk into a candlelit mass where incense clouds the air and the sermon includes a joke about Caesar's beard. You pass catacombs filled with relics, some legitimate, some suspiciously labeled "Authentic Feather from Archangel's Wing, 2nd edition." And as the organ groans and the congregation chants, you feel the hum of a single faith trying to cover an empire that never cracked. It's orderly, it's unified, but it's starting to smell like bureaucracy.
You're in a banquet hall now, reclining on one elbow, sipping something spiced and far too warm. A young man walks in, wearing a crown that's slightly too big and an expression that says, "I'm either a ruler or a substitute history teacher." His name? Romulus Augustulus, and in this world, he never fell. Authoritative fact: in our timeline, Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. He was deposed in 476 CE by Odoacer, a Germanic general, marking the traditional fall of Rome in the West. Odd fact: the name Romulus Augustulus literally means Little Augustus, which sounds more like a stage name for a child actor than the leader of a collapsing empire. He was probably only a teenager when crowned. But in this alternate Rome that didn't split, the West never collapses. There's no Odoacer, no mercenary betrayal, no sending of the imperial insignia back to Constantinople, because, hey, Constantinople never existed. Romulus stays and somehow grows into the crown. You walk beside him as he tours the forum, now more marble than muscle, but still buzzing. He's no military genius, no philosopher king, but he's savvy. He listens to advisors, he fixes aqueducts, he throws just enough games at the Colosseum to keep the mobs entertained and not rioting. Light joke number 1, you imagine him asking his guard, "Am I the real emperor or just the empire's unpaid intern with a laurel?" Light joke number 2, you picture him trying to outlaw tunics above the knee, only to discover it applies to his statue. Light joke number 3, you suspect half his edicts are just passive-aggressive memos to senators who snubbed his birthday. And it works, sort of. Rome, still unified, goes through a period of awkward adolescent stability. Not glamorous, not golden, but functional.
Romulus institutes a new census, mostly to figure out who's skipping taxes by pretending to be shepherds. He starts standardizing coinage again, after someone tries to pay a soldier with buttons and prayers. But the empire is holding. There's no quick collapse. Instead, a slow, cautious rejuvenation. With no Eastern rival draining talent and trade, the Western cities survive. Milan remains a power hub. Ravenna keeps its marshy seat of governance. Even Londinium gets a facelift, some roads, better drainage, and a brand new temple to Mercury that doubles as a community theater. And here's the twist. Romulus gets better at being emperor. 10 years in, he's no longer little Augustus. He's Emperor Romulus I. He organizes a summit with Gothic leaders, not to fight, but to negotiate territory and trade. He funds road repairs in Gaul. He even commissions a history of the empire, where he's described as adequate, yet surprisingly likable. The Senate groans, but goes along with it. The people shrug and keep bathing. The temples stay open, the legions keep marching. You sit beside Romulus as he watches a chariot race. His hair is silvering, and he's sipping honeyed wine with a smug little smirk. "We were supposed to fall," he says softly. "Everyone said so. But here he is. And here you are, watching a version of Rome that didn't crash. It coasted. No fanfare, no flaming ruins. Just a surprisingly decent emperor with an unfortunate name, holding together a world that refused to fracture."
You're in a smoky workshop now, somewhere between Alexandria and madness. A Roman engineer with soot on his nose is yelling something about a pressure differential, while behind him, steam hisses from a gleaming brass contraption that looks like a coffee maker with anger issues. Yes, in this Rome that never split, the empire just stumbled into gunpowder. Authoritative fact: the real Roman Empire never discovered gunpowder. That technological leap occurred in China around the 9th century CE and didn't reach Europe until centuries later. Roman warfare relied on siege weapons, archers, and lots of yelling. Odd fact: Hero of Alexandria, a Roman-era inventor from the 1st century CE, created a functioning steam-powered device called the aeolipile, a sort of ancient spinning engine. It wasn't used industrially, but it shows Rome flirted with the idea of harnessing steam. And in this version of history, Rome didn't split, didn't fall, and had just enough time, peace, and curious librarians to keep asking dangerous questions like, what happens if we set this on fire, but with math? You dodge a spark as a centurion-turned-scientist rolls out the Ignis Bombus, a prototype hand cannon made of bronze, hope, and barely contained terror. It's clunky, slow to load, and terrifyingly loud. The military is skeptical. The philosophers are horrified. The emperor is intrigued. Light joke number 1. You imagine a soldier yelling, "We used to throw javelins, now we throw explosions." Light joke number 2. You picture a senator frowning at a budget scroll labeled "Mystical Combustion Tubes." Light joke number 3. You suspect every third inventor in Alexandria is missing eyebrows. Rome begins its experimental arms race, not against an enemy, but against itself. With no Byzantium siphoning off intellectual talent and no Dark Ages to burn libraries, the empire's scientific progress gets weird fast. Workshops spring up in Antioch and Carthage. One team invents a metal-reinforced shield that folds into a portable table. Another figures out a way to launch arrows using compressed air, basically an ancient nerf war. But not all progress is loud. Some of it is quietly transformative. Glassblowers develop lenses sharp enough to read microscript. Medical schools in Pergamon start using bronze scalpels in minor surgeries. Bureaucrats in Hispania draft laws about powder permits, trying to regulate alchemists with bad aim and big dreams. You sip wine in a villa where the host uses a heated pipe system to keep his floors warm. Outside, streetlights burn longer thanks to pressurized oil lanterns. And in the army, the test results are clear. One shaky gunner with a fire stick is worth a whole squad of spearmen if he doesn't explode first. And it's not just war. With these new toys come new philosophies. You overhear a heated debate. If fire can be stored, can the gods be outsmarted? One priest faints, another takes notes. The church issues a vague but strongly worded scroll warning that he who ignites must also pray. It's unclear what that means, but people carve it on cannon barrels just in case. Rome doesn't become modern overnight, but it shifts. Instead of crumbling under its own weight, the empire gets curious, dangerous, inventive. A Rome with gunpowder isn't just more powerful, it's more experimental. It starts imagining not just how to defend itself, but how to build forward. And somewhere, in a quiet library filled with scrolls and soot, someone just asked, "What if we used steam to move a cart?" Oh dear. You're walking down a bustling Roman street now, but something's off. The tunics are familiar, the columns are grand, but the voices, they sound wrong. Or rather, too right. Everyone is still speaking Latin. Sort of. Because in this Rome that never split, the empire held together so tightly that the languages we know, French, Spanish, Romanian, Portuguese, never had a chance to grow up and move out. Authoritative fact. In real history, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Latin fractured into what we now call the Romance languages. Isolated provinces slowly evolved their own dialects, shaped by local influences and invaders. Odd fact, Romanian is the closest modern language to classical Latin in terms of grammar, even though it evolved far from Rome's heartland. Blame the Carpathians and a whole lot of stubbornness. But here, no fall, no centuries of Gothic neighbors inventing funky grammar, just the empire everywhere, and with it, Latin. Still alive, still smug. You stop by a bakery in Gaul and listen to two merchants argue about wheat prices in Latin. You stroll through a school in Britannia where children conjugate amare with barely concealed boredom. You step into a temple in Lusitania where prayers still rhyme in dactylic hexameter, and they all understand each other, more or less. See, Latin didn't freeze, it flexed. It grew strange limbs, it picked up regional slang and dropped a few vowels, but it remained itself. What you hear now is Empire Latin, a standardized, bureaucratized, slightly nasal dialect enforced by annual pronunciation audits. Light joke number 1. You imagine a speech inspector wagging a stylus at a citizen. "That's not veni, that's veiny. You've got a soft E violation." Light joke number 2. You picture a Gallic teenager asking, "Can I just speak Celtic now?" And his dad replying, "Only if you want to get audited." Light joke number 3. You suspect half the Senate's time is spent debating if Cicero should rhyme with Nero. Still, the empire's obsession with linguistic unity pays off. Laws are clearer, trade is smoother, soldiers from Syria and Spain can shout at each other in perfect sync. Latin becomes not just a language, but a unifying force, like Wi-Fi, but scrollier. And that means something else too. Identities stay Roman. There's no Spanish or French culture, just variations on a Roman theme. Provincial pride exists, sure, but it's always under the big umbrella of Imperium Romanum. Flags, still the eagle. Hymns, still in Latin. National holidays, a rotating calendar of Caesar birthdays and miracle anniversaries, including that one time someone in Carthage allegedly turned wine back into wine. You peek into a tavern where a bard is singing in Latin, with a Gaelic accent, using words borrowed from a Moorish merchant. It's weirdly beautiful, like opera got drunk and decided to salsa. But beneath all the elegance is something more complicated. Without linguistic drift, there's less room for rebellion. Rome keeps control partly by keeping people speaking its language. A scribe in Dalmatia whispers, "We can write poetry, but not protest." A playwright in Africa mutters, "No one riots in hexameter." But people find workarounds. A group of kids in Numidia invent a game where they replace Latin words with animal sounds and dare their parents to decode it. A love letter in Gaul uses invented idioms that sound poetic but secretly say, "Let's run away." Language survives because Rome, unified, loud, and stubborn, refused to let it break. And as you pass a statue of Cicero with graffiti on his sandals, written, of course, in flawless subjunctive, you realize, in a world where the Roman Empire never split, everyone still speaks Latin, but no one sounds the same.
You're riding a camel now, slowly, awkwardly, and with growing respect for people who do this for a living. The sun is blazing over the Arabian Peninsula, and just ahead, the markets of Mecca are buzzing. But something is different. This is a world where Islam rises into a Rome that never fell. Authoritative fact: in real history, Islam emerged in the early 7th century in the Arabian Peninsula and rapidly expanded across territories that had once belonged to the Eastern Roman, Byzantine, and Persian empires. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire had already occurred by then, and the East was vulnerable and overstretched. Odd fact: the Prophet Muhammad reportedly sent letters to both the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius and the Sasanian Emperor Khosrow II, inviting them to embrace Islam. One emperor was respectful, the other tore up the letter. Guess who had the shorter reign? But in this timeline, there is no Byzantine Empire. There's just Rome, still whole, still massive, still squinting eastward, wondering what this monotheistic firestorm on the horizon means for its tax structures. And when Islam emerges, Rome notices immediately. You sit in a dusty Roman outpost in Arabia, where a centurion reads reports from Mecca and Medina. A merchant from Damascus leans over and mutters, "They're not just preaching, they're uniting." Rome doesn't panic yet. Instead, it sends envoys with scrolls and backup. Light joke number 1. You imagine a Roman ambassador arriving in Medina and asking, "Which Caesar are we pledging loyalty to today?"
Light joke number 2, you picture an Islamic scholar replying, "We already have a law system, but thanks for the pamphlets." Light joke number 3, you suspect the Roman translation of the Quran came with footnotes, commentary, and a Latin glossary no one asked for. And now it gets tense. The unified Roman Empire isn't about to cede territory, not even spiritual territory. But Islam isn't a simple rebellion, it's a movement. It's fast, magnetic, and terrifyingly organized. In this world, it still spreads, still builds, still dreams. But the political landscape is different. There's no easy collapse in the Levant for Islam to sweep through. The cities of Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria are still deeply Roman, fortified, governed, covered in taxes and temples. So Islam adapts. Some tribes make peace with Rome. Some cities go rogue. Some Roman officials secretly convert, then send confusing memos back to Rome with phrases like spiritual restructuring in progress. The Roman Church is furious. It's one thing to argue about bread. It's another to lose bishops to a prophet named Muhammad. And now Rome has a decision to make. Crack down, send legions, crush the rising tide, declare monotheistic blasphemy? Or coexist, tolerate, absorb, make space, and hope Latin wins the long game? You sit beside a general as he sharpens a sword and says, "I don't understand their faith, but I understand momentum." You walk through Damascus, where mosques and basilicas stand side by side. You hear prayers in Arabic, you hear Latin hymns, and sometimes, weirdly, you hear both at once. Islam spreads, but differently. Slower in some places, stronger in others. No easy Byzantine takeover, no dramatic conquest of Jerusalem. But the message travels, the faith builds, the empire bends, but doesn't break. A Roman governor in Egypt tries to ban Arabic. He's replaced within a month by someone who can chant salve and salam in the same breath. Rome doesn't collapse. Islam doesn't retreat. They circle each other, compete, and slowly overlap.
You're bouncing along the River Seine now, on a longboat that should be raiding a monastery, but instead it's stopping for tolls. The sails are furled, the oars are up, and the Vikings are being polite. Welcome to a world where the Roman Empire never split, and the Norse are knocking at the front door of an empire that, inconveniently, hasn't crumbled. Authoritative fact. In real history, Viking raids began in the late 8th century, taking advantage of Europe's fractured kingdoms and weak defenses after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The lack of centralized power made monasteries and towns easy targets. Odd fact. The Vikings didn't just pillage, they settled. They founded cities like Dublin and traded as far as Baghdad. Some even became mercenaries for the Byzantine Empire, forming the elite Varangian Guard, which is just fancy Norse for "we fight for whoever pays in silver." But in this version of reality, things are different. There is no fractured West, no petty kingdoms, no soft targets, just Rome, still unified, still suspicious, still very much not in the mood. You're seated next to a Viking named Skarvi, who squints at a Roman port and says, "They built walls everywhere." He sounds disappointed and kind of impressed.
The Norse had planned to raid, but instead, they're being inspected. You pass through a Roman customs checkpoint on the river. A Latin-speaking official boards the longboat, eyes the axes, and asks, "Are these for personal use or diplomatic gifts?" Light joke number 1. You imagine a Viking handing over a helmet and muttering, "It's a, souvenir?" Light joke number 2. You picture a Roman tax collector raising an eyebrow and saying, "These dragon carvings need registration tags." Light joke number 3. You suspect the only thing more terrifying than a Viking raid is a Roman bureaucrat with a clipboard. And so, the Vikings shift strategies. They realize the Roman Empire can't be bullied, but it can be bargained with. They start arriving not as raiders, but as consultants. Roman generals hire Norse warriors as auxiliary scouts. Merchants invite them to trade fur, amber, and strong mead. One bold Viking tries to join the Senate, but gets rejected after failing the Toga exam. You wander through a town in northern Gaul where Norse settlers live in weird harmony with Roman citizens. The blacksmith's name is Gaius Olafsson. His forge smells like burnt pine and ambition. His sign reads, "Swords, shields, and sauna accessories." And the blending doesn't stop there. Roman engineers start reinforcing river fortresses with Viking ship ramps. Norse warriors build bathhouses, awkwardly. The children speak Latin with a Norse accent that makes Caesar sound like he's sneezing. Rome, unified and still standing, fears no Vikings. It absorbs them. But not everyone is thrilled. Old senators complain. "What happened to good Roman discipline?" they grumble, as they watch young recruits swing axes and drink mead from amphorae. The church frowns. Crosses now appear alongside runes. Someone in Britannia composes a hymn in Old Norse that accidentally summons a goat. And yet, it works. Because without the vacuum of power that existed in real history, the Norse don't get to carve out kingdoms. No Normandy, no Danelaw, no need to burn monasteries when the empire pays you to guard them. You sit by a riverbank at dusk, sipping wine with a Viking who's learning Latin through legal contracts. He scratches his beard and says, "I came to conquer, stayed for the aqueducts." The stars appear, the longboats rest, and the empire still stands. Broader, odder, but whole.
You're leaning over a fresco now. Vivid reds, deep blues, and a man holding a human skull while sketching a bicycle that hasn't been invented yet. No, it's not Da Vinci. It's Flavius Lucianus, Roman polymath and part-time troublemaker, presenting his latest invention to the Academy of Mechanica. It's the 10th century, or what would have been the 10th century if time hadn't been rerouted by the world's most stubborn empire. Because in this Rome that never split, the Renaissance comes early, and it wears a toga. Authoritative fact. In our timeline, the Renaissance began in the 14th century in Italy, largely because classical knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome was rediscovered, ironically, after being buried by the collapse of the Western Empire. Odd fact. Some historians believe that if Roman infrastructure and intellectual institutions had survived, scientific progress could have advanced centuries earlier. Yes, steam engines, telescopes, and even primitive flight could have happened by candlelight. So now imagine a unified Roman Empire that never needed to rediscover knowledge, because it never lost it. You walk through a marble-floored university in Neapolis where scholars debate optics over olives. There's a printing press chugging away in the courtyard, operated by a monk with ink-stained teeth and opinions on the Latin dative case. And the art? It's everywhere. Mosaics evolve into perspective paintings. Public baths feature sculptures that look suspiciously like precursors to anatomical charts. Engineers invent a way to project sunlight through colored glass, primitive stained glass slideshows. Yes, that's real, and yes, it confuses everyone. Light joke number 1. You picture a philosopher yelling, "The printing press is ruining scroll culture." Light joke number 2. You imagine a critic sneering, "These marble busts are too realistic. I can see his pores." Light joke number 3. You suspect the most rebellious thing a Roman teenager can do now is paint something ugly. The pace of innovation snowballs. With no split, no dark age, and no need to rebuild from ashes, Roman minds simply kept thinking. Algebra arrives from trade with the East. Astronomy becomes its own guild. A group of scholars in Carthage accidentally invents algebraic notation while trying to calculate festival days. You overhear a conversation in a coffee house. Yes, coffee has arrived early too, about mechanical birds powered by counterweights. One eccentric engineer claims he can build a machine that mimics human speech. The others laugh nervously. And the patronage? Oh, it's everywhere. Senators commission mathematicians, emperors host invention contests. One artist wins an imperial grant for inventing a new pigment called imperial blush. It turns out to be fermented pomegranate. Still edible, slightly toxic. But it's not all statues and scrolls. This Renaissance brings new power and new questions. The church, still centralized, is forced to confront science that moves fast. Bishops issue declarations about the soul of the automaton. A young scholar suggests the Earth isn't the center of the universe and is promptly invited to a very awkward dinner with 10 cardinals and no wine. Yet debate is allowed. Slowly, cautiously. Rome likes order, but it also likes progress, especially when it can claim credit. You tour an observatory in Lusitania, where a Roman named Aurelia catalogs sunspots with a polished bronze mirror. You watch a crowd gather for a sky demonstration, where glass lenses project the moon's craters onto a courtyard wall. They gasp. They argue. One man faints. You smile. This is a Rome that never lost its curiosity, that never stopped building temples, but also never stopped wondering what's above them. And as the sky darkens and the stars begin their slow arc, you realize the Renaissance didn't need to be reborn. It just needed space to grow.
You're standing on a coastal dock now, breathing in the salt air and watching as a sleek, triple-masted Roman ship creaks against its mooring ropes. Its name is Aurora Maxima, and it's headed west, far west. Because in this unbroken Roman Empire, they're going to the New World, and they're doing it 1,000 years early. Authoritative fact. In our history, European exploration of the Americas began in 1492 with Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish crown. But the ancient Romans, while accomplished sailors, never ventured across the Atlantic. They lacked the navigational tech, political motivation, and sturdy enough ships. Odd fact. Some ancient Roman writers did theorize that land might exist beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. But those ideas were often dismissed as poetic nonsense, or an early form of ocean conspiracy theories. But in this alternate world, Rome never collapsed. Trade never shattered. Maps never disappeared into monastery basements. So the curiosity, it keeps building. And eventually, someone stands on the coast of Hispania, looks westward, and says, "What if there's more?" Enter Lucia Elia, explorer, mathematician, and absolute menace to the Naval Safety Committee. She designs a new class of ship, part trireme, part Phoenician cargo hauler, with reinforced hulls, triangular sails, and a hold full of dried figs, wine, and extremely nervous scholars. Light joke number 1. You imagine her shouting, "I didn't become the first female admiral of Rome just to not find a continent." Light joke number 2. You picture a senator complaining, "Exploration is expensive, and we still haven't fixed the fountains." Light joke number 3. You suspect half the crew thinks they're headed straight into the mouth of Neptune. But they sail, and it takes weeks, then months. They chart stars, track clouds, debate whether the ocean's edge has a polite curtain or just an abrupt scream. The priest on board keeps muttering about divine boundaries. The astronomer keeps throwing fish at him. And then they find land. Not the Bahamas, not Florida, but something. An island. Dense forests, birds too bright to be from home, and fruits that taste like citrus and mystery. They call it Nova Terra, new land. Creative? No. Very Roman? Absolutely. The reaction back home is chaos. Rome had spent centuries mapping every inch of the known world. Adding new continents wasn't on the agenda. But here it is. Land, resources, people. Not for conquering, not yet, but for studying, trading, carefully poking with a stylus. Diplomatic teams are dispatched, featuring bilingual scribes, official gift baskets, and a scroll that reads, "Hello, we're from Rome. Please don't spear us." And the native cultures? They're confused too. These foreigners wear togas, quote Virgil, and insist on hosting formal banquets with 3 courses of olives. But they don't arrive as desperate invaders. They come with stable funding, established trade routes, and paperwork. So much paperwork. There are missteps, of course. One Roman governor tries to rename an entire island Little Sicily. He's sent home. Another insists on building a forum. It sinks. But Rome learns, slowly, awkwardly, respectfully, at least more than history once allowed. You tour the new port city of Portus Felix, built with local input and Roman concrete. There's a market where spices from the Amazon trade next to African ivory and Egyptian glass. A local artist paints murals using Roman pigments and Mayan patterns. And somehow, it works. Without desperate kingdoms vying for glory, without crusader ideologies backing their boats, without a fractured Europe clawing for survival, Rome explores, gently, intellectually, bureaucratically. You sit under a palm tree, drinking fermented cactus juice with a Roman poet and a local shaman, both trying to explain the moon using astronomy and mythology, and realizing they kind of agree. And as the ocean breeze picks up and Aurora Maxima prepares for another voyage, you realize something strange. Rome didn't just survive, it expanded, thoughtfully. And for once, it listened.
You're perched high above a crowded plaza now, leaning against a marble balustrade as banners flutter below, red, gold, and strangely metallic. The crowd isn't gathering for a triumph or a gladiator match. They're here to see something new. Because in this Rome that never split, It's the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, Roman style. Authoritative fact. The real Industrial Revolution began in the 18th century in Britain, fueled by coal, capitalism, and an overabundance of wool. But the groundwork, mathematics, metallurgy, mechanics, had existed long before. The Romans had the brains. What they lacked was the breakdown of empire to make space for new systems. Odd fact, Roman mines did use rudimentary water-powered tools and cranes. They had road networks, scheduled deliveries, and factory-like workshops, fabricae, for military gear. Some scholars argue they were just one good combustion engine away from reinventing the future. In this version of history, they find it. Not because of war, not because of desperation, because they were bored. You're watching the grand unveiling of a steam-powered grain mill in Ravenna, built by a former aqueduct engineer and a monk who got tired of carrying sacks. The thing wheezes like a wheezy god and scares the pigeons off the roof, but it works. Like joke number 1. You imagine a baker yelling, "I just wanted bread, not thunder." Like joke number 2. You picture a senator squinting at the machinery and asking, "Is it legal to enslave water vapor?" Like joke number 3. You suspect Roman lawyers are already drafting rules about liability for machine-induced toga burns. And it spreads. Workshops become factories. Legions are equipped with mass-produced armor, each segment stamped with the name of the regional governor and, weirdly, the phrase, "do not tumble dry." Bureaucrats begin using crude calculating machines to track taxes, birth rates, and temple donations, which go dramatically down once someone invents automated incense sprayers. The city of Massilia builds the first smoke-belching, wood-fueled cart, rolling over cobblestones with the subtlety of a rhino on stilts. A man named Titus Mechanicus gets arrested for racing his steam chariot through the Senate's courtyard. But not everyone is thrilled. Craftsmen riot, monks protest. The church issues a cautious decree titled, "On the Moral Use of Roaring Devices." But the emperor, clever, aging, and probably addicted to invention, doubles down. He funds the Ars Nova initiative, a sprawling network of academies, tinker labs, and trade schools. Soon you see pneumatic elevators in public bathhouses, iron rails linking Hispania to Gaul, heated floors in fish markets, questionable choice, an entire university dedicated to applied mechanical theology, which you assume is just engineers yelling about God and gears. And beneath it all, steam, coal, iron. A Rome that didn't break is now rebuilding itself, not from ruins, but into something new. You ride a prototype rail chariot from Alexandria to Ephesus in record time. A young student beside you sketches out a theory for flight using wings of cork and bronze. Her sandals are singed. Her ambition is not. The empire has changed. It is louder, grimmer, smoggy in places, but alive, and no longer content with columns and conquest. Now it wants turbines and telescopes. And as you watch the latest invention, a mechanical loom that weaves tunics in half the time while cursing in Latin, you realize something shocking. Rome has entered the age of industry, and it might never look back.
You're drifting over a Roman skyline now. Rooftops shimmering in the haze, banners snapping in the wind. Below you, marble domes curve beside metal towers. An eagle glides past, real or mechanical, you're not entirely sure. Because now, in this Rome that never split,
the empire has reached the modern age, and it never went anywhere. Authoritative fact. In our timeline, the Roman Empire ended centuries before the rise of modern democracies, nation-states, or even basic human rights as we know them. Its rigid hierarchies and elite governance wouldn't have easily translated into the world of voting booths and internet memes. Odd fact. The Romans had a version of elections, but mostly for show. Real power came through connections, military strength, and a disturbingly high tolerance for bribery, disguised as favors. But here, in this unbroken Roman Empire, the idea of citizen power didn't vanish into medieval monasteries. It evolved, slowly, clunkily, like a senator trying to run in sandals. You're watching a debate in the Curia Populi, a massive domed forum lined with glowing scroll boards and very dramatic lighting. The plebeians now elect representatives, real ones, with terms, checks, and the occasional shouting match that ends with, "You misquoted Cicero, sir." Light joke number 1. You picture a candidate promising free olives for all and a minor aqueduct expansion. Light joke number 2. You imagine someone writing in Pliny the Elder on the ballot out of protest. Light joke number 3. You suspect half the Senate is just bitter their kids became inventors instead of lawyers. The church, still here, still powerful, but now sharing space with secular courts, scientific councils, and spiritual hotlines staffed by retired monks with strong opinions on everything. You walk through a modern Roman city where trains run on hydrogen and Latin timetables. Public bathhouses have been rebranded as wellness spas. Holographic scrolls replay Caesar's speeches with subtitles and dramatic music. You meet a woman named Aurelia Maxima, part-time magistrate, full-time engineer. She's designing underwater tunnels between Carthage and Sicily. When you ask why, she shrugs and says, to save time, and because Rome. There's Wi-Fi, called VoxNet, of course. There's social media, Forum Nova, where senators post policy drafts and poets upload breakfast epics in dactylic hexameter. The lingua franca is still Latin, but it's been updated. You hear teenagers saying things like, "Ubi est party tonight," and "Brutus was sus." And technology? Rome didn't just catch up, it led. Its obsession with roads evolved into data infrastructure. Its love of aqueducts turned into hydroelectric networks. Its bureaucracy, once mocked, became the foundation of a terrifyingly efficient public sector that delivers mail by drone and taxes you before you spend. But there's more. Rome now manages space launches from a desert base near Cyrene. The program is called Aquila, and the first satellite was called Jupiter's Eye. The second one, Venus Rising, was destroyed after someone accidentally programmed it in ancient Greek. And education? Oh, it's everywhere. Every Roman child learns not just reading and rhetoric, but robotics. The phrase tabula rasa now refers to a digital tablet with AI tutors built in. You pass a school where students wear togas over lab coats and argue about whether Mars should adopt Senate-style governance. But not everything is perfect. A few regions grumble. The old provinces want autonomy. Some accuse the emperor, now a constitutional figurehead, of being more of a brand than a leader. The church struggles with AI theology. Do algorithms have a soul? One bishop sighs. And the Forum Nova moderation team is frankly overwhelmed. Still, Rome stands. It pulses with culture, code, concrete, and contradiction. A place where gladiators are now esports champions, where philosophy podcasts have government grants, where democracy doesn't look like Athens or Washington, but something distinctly Roman, something familiar. And as night falls and drones circle the Pantheon like glowing fireflies, you whisper to yourself, Rome didn't fall, it rebooted.
You're on the edge of the world now. Well, what used to be the edge. Somewhere deep in the Amazon, beneath a sky thick with stars and humidity, a Roman expedition sets up camp. Not for conquest, not for colonization, for curiosity. Because in this version of Earth, where the Roman Empire never split, never fell, and never stopped building, it finally remembered to look inward. Authoritative fact. In real history, Rome's expansion hit a wall, literally. Hadrian built one across Britain to mark the limit. The empire was vast, but it couldn't keep pushing forever. Internal pressures, revolts, and logistical strain pulled it apart. Odd fact. Ancient Rome had a unit of time called a momentum, roughly 90 seconds. That means this entire civilization was technically built in millions of moments, one odd minute at a time. But here, Rome lasted, so it had the time. Time to finish expanding, time to reconsider its borders, time to ask, what now? The answer, exploration. Deep exploration. You walk beside a group of scholars, cartographers, and botanists dressed in a hybrid of khaki and tunic. They're cataloging plants, drawing maps, and occasionally yelling, "By Jupiter, that snake is enormous." There's no war here, just awe. They've come not to conquer, but to observe. They're part of a new movement called the Terrae Nostrae Initiative, Our Lands, a cultural shift from domination to stewardship. Light joke number 1. You imagine a naturalist naming a new frog Rana bureaucratica because it refuses to jump without permission. Light joke number 2. You picture a philosopher exclaiming, "This vine is a metaphor for the Senate." Light joke number 3. You suspect someone's writing a love poem to a tree again. The empire has changed. From stone roads to satellite relays, from legions to laboratories, from emperors to elected councils, from marble statues to neural networks. You sit by a fire watching researchers argue over whether lightning bugs should be regulated. A young girl sketches a flying machine shaped like a bird. An old centurion, now a peacekeeper, reads a scroll beside a quiet jaguar. This is Rome now, not the center of the world, but part of it, intertwined, aware, tired of building walls, more interested in learning what lives beyond them. The stars above shift slowly, like gears in an ancient mechanism. Someone beside you mutters, "We could go farther, space perhaps." And why not? Rome has already outlived its collapse, outlived its myths, outlived history as we knew it. What began with wolf's milk and stolen Sabines is now a planet-wide network of thinkers, builders, healers, dreamers. Not perfect, not even close, but whole, and still very, very Roman. You made it. Through the centuries,
through steam and soot and togas with pockets. You've walked beside emperors and engineers, monks and mathematicians, senators who feared thunder, and teenagers who spray-painted Cicero with emoji. You felt the damped shadows of unbroken aqueducts and the dry heat of lunar launch pads carved with Latin inscriptions. And somehow, through diplomacy, absurdity, and the world's most aggressively organized postal system, Rome never fell. This wasn't a story about triumph through violence, or domination, or marble monuments taller than your rent. It was a story about continuity. What if a civilization just kept going, never paused, never collapsed, never asked, what else can we build? You saw a church stretch without snapping, languages evolve without losing their root, Vikings ask for permits, philosophers build factories, and the New World, not conquered, but courted, became part of a Rome that learned, painfully, slowly, to listen. And as you fall asleep now, you hear it. Not the roar of lions or crowds, but something quieter. Gears humming, voices debating, pigeons cooing beside 3D printed columns. A living empire, a breathing idea, not perfect, but persistent. Let the torch-lit baths fade from your memory. Let the Senate floor slip beneath the clouds. Let the statues blur and the satellites drift across the sky. Rome is still here, and tonight, it's watching the stars.